Much for joining us, spending time on this beautiful day to learn about DC's record relief laws and threats from Congress towards those laws. My name is Darby Hickey. I'm Senior Policy Counsel here at DC Justice Lab, and I'll be joined in presenting today by my colleague Nye Winslow, who is Policy Counsel at DC Justice Lab. So glad to have you all join us. As I mentioned, we are recording this for sharing more broadly, just as an FYI. So let's go ahead and get into it. Our agenda of today looks at why this matters now, record sealing as good policy. We'll review the bills, and then we'll talk about what's next. So why are we talking about this right now? It's because DC's lack of statehood makes us vulnerable to federal interference in our laws, in our systems. And unfortunately, we've seen an unprecedented level of this over the past year plus, I would say, and really just ramping up over the past couple years, particularly with lots of bills introduced in Congress to repeal our laws or to rewrite our laws. The successful repeal of our Revised Criminal Code Act and of some the almost successful repeal of some tax legislation that the council passed early this year. So it's really an unprecedented moment that we're in of congressional and presidential administration attacks on DC. And we wanted to dive into this particular piece because it has been a priority. DC's record relief laws have been a priority for interference from the U.S. Attorney for DC, as well as a presidential advisor, Stephen Miller. What this looks like right now is that there's a bill in the House to repeal the Second Chance Amendment Act, which is our record relief law passed a number of years ago. There's also bills in the House and Senate to rewrite the Youth Rehabilitation Act, which would limit its record relief application. And similar efforts have been included in budget proposals both last year and this year. Last year, fortunately, they did not go forward, so we're feeling pretty good about that, but you never know. And we'll talk more about kind of where things stand as we go forward. So with that, I want to go ahead and turn it over to Nye Winslow on our staff, who's going to talk about record relief laws, about the Second Chance Amendment Act, and why they're a good policy, among other things. Go ahead and take it away, Nye.
Thank you, Darby, and thanks everyone for being here. So the Second Chance Amendment Act is good policy for a number of reasons. What the research shows is that 1 in 7, and some say even 1 in 3 DC residents has some sort of criminal record. And when people have a criminal record, it creates all types of barriers or collateral consequences that will keep them from being able to move forward with their life, securing their family as well. So we're talking about getting access to employment and steady income, safe and secure housing, educational opportunities, licenses, in some instances, different types of benefits, all types of resources that people need to move up the economic ladder. And one of the ways to help people overcome these barriers is to implement a system where people can get their records sealed or expunged. And the Second Chance Amendment Act in particular does this in 2 ways, which are great. So there's a petition-based function, which allows people to petition the court to have their records sealed or expunged. And then there's also an even better way, which is the automatic portion. It's easier in the sense that the person with the record doesn't have to do anything. Once they hit a certain criteria, the court will automatically seal or expunge their record. And being able to have your record sealed or expunged helps break down all of these barriers that we talked about that will keep people really involved in the informal economy and unable to legally get access to these resources to move forward with their lives. And next slide, please. Thank you. So it's really important to note that record relief laws generally have broad bipartisan support. The Clean Slate Initiative did a study recently which showed that 78% of Republicans and 83% of Democrats support or somewhat support their state's record relief law. And there are different reasons for why these record relief laws resonate with people across the political spectrum. You see some people come at it from a moral and even religious point of view, saying that just getting people a second chance is just the right thing to do. And some people come from it more of an economic point of view, from the standpoint of if people have records, then they're not working and they're not paying taxes and the economy is not being supported. But regardless of, and there are all types of views in between, right? People have both, but regardless of what the underlying motivation is, what we see is these laws have broad bipartisan support and have been implemented in a wide array of states with different political leanings from Pennsylvania, Utah, Oklahoma, Michigan, California, um, that vary across the political spectrum. Next slide, please. Oh. And so, yeah, just talking a bit about kind of the rehabilitation piece. The record release laws help in a number of ways. They help reintegrate people back into society, kind of as I was talking about, and breaking down those barriers, and also helping to build trust in the criminal legal system, in law enforcement, which helps to increase public safety. From people that have had a record. That has kind of been hung over their head for 10, 15, 20 years when they're no longer that same person that maybe did whatever it was that got that charge or that record or that conviction. Um, it really breaks down a level of belief in the system, a level of trust in the system, and a level of motivation to kind of turn things around and get back on the right track when it appears that the system is just holding something over your head for 15 and 20 years. And someone can be a completely different person and not involved in any of the things that they may have been involved in prior to, but they're still finding this old record, keeping them from getting a job, keeping them from getting housing, keeping them from accessing all of these different resources. And so the increase in trust is a really big part of what helps to increase public safety broadly for everybody, as that level of trust in the system, that level of motivation to turn things around in your life really helps people to believe that they can stay in the legal economy, in the formal economy, and get access to all of these resources that people without records have access to. And I'll pause here so Darby can talk about the YRA.
I actually wonder, Nye, if you would talk to us a little bit more about what the Second Chance Amendment does. Like, I know you mentioned about by motion and by and automatic. Can you just dive in a tiny bit more on like the how that all works, where we're at with it right now, and I don't know if there's any detail you want to add around like um, what the outcome is or what the impact is when someone is or what how it like works, the logistics of it, I guess.
Sure. So where we are right now is the implementation phase. So as I said a little briefly, but there are two different mechanisms for people to get their records sealed or expunged. So either through a petition where a person who has a record and can either by themselves or with an attorney petition the court to say, I've hit a certain level of criteria, which generally will be between 5 to 8 years after the completion of their sentence for misdemeanors or some felonies and say, I've had my time, I've had the time period, waiting period completed, and now I'm eligible to have my record sealed or expunged. And then the court can review that petition and make a decision after a certain period of time, or for mainly misdemeanors or non-convictions, the court can automatically seal or expunge a record based on kind of what the record was, how long it's been, and that can happen, as I was saying, automatically without a person or attorney having to do anything. So the by petition part of the law has already been in effect, and we are seeing that process play out now. The automatic portion of the law will be fully in effect later next year. We're looking at October 2027. So right now, we are trying to make sure that the law is implemented successfully. We know in different states, the implementation part can take some time. After the law is passed, it's almost like that's the easy part. And then making sure all the apparatus is in place and is working properly can take years. And so right now we're in a position of making sure that not only the petition-based portion, but the automatic portion is going in effect smoothly. And we are trying to work through the challenges that that has because of a lot of data being stored about when people's sentences end. And in DC, we're in a unique position because that data is held in a number of different agencies. And so in states, that data is often held in one place. And so it's a little bit easier for the law to be implemented because we know where that data is stored and what the date is. But here we have different agencies that hold this information, and we're trying to make sure that the agencies are all working together so that we can have this portion of the law implemented successfully by October 2027 when the time comes. So that's kind of where we are right now is in that implementation phase, which is an extremely important phase for the law.
Thank you so much for diving a little deeper into that. Appreciate it. And folks, we are going to have a question and answer period, but also feel free to put any questions in the chat and we can answer them as we go as applies. Wanted to briefly touch on another law, which I already mentioned, the Youth Rehabilitation Act, which also is a record relief law. It's much older than the Second Chance Amendment Act, although it was updated in 2018. And one of the facets of the Rehabilitation Act, which actually dates back to the 1950s and is intended to provide alternative sentencing options and record relief for young adults and teens who are, for teens who are tried in the adult system, to give them the opportunity to have sentencing alternatives as well as record relief. And the record relief part is that upon completion of your sentence, of your Youth Rehabilitation Act sentence, you, as long as you've checked all your boxes, as long as you've been compliant, you haven't had any issues, you can get your record set aside, which functionally is equivalent to record sealing, which is in statute under the Second Chance Amendment Act. So what it means is that that record, that the record of the arrest, of the charges, of the trial, of the conviction, all of that becomes sealed from public view. It can still be used, particularly by the courts, but also in some instances by prosecution and defense, uh, with regards to identifying if there's been previous convictions or if under a sentencing law, or if you needed to prove something in another case, it would still be available for that. So it's very similar to the Second Chance Amendment Act in terms of the mechanism that it works. It's just unique to Youth Rehabilitation Act recipients, sentence recipients, which is there's small universe of folks there. This potential for setting aside the record, right? Same as the potential for sealing the record, is a pretty strong incentive for the young person in this instance to turn things around. And there was some research done on this by the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council here in DC after the law was changed in 2018, looking at the outcomes for young people who did get YRA sentences and then were able to get their records set aside or sealed, in comparison to control group. And what they found was that those that were able to get their records set aside were half as likely to be rearrested or reconvicted. So that shows really that power of what Nye was talking about in terms of the impact of having your record sealed and not open to public view, how that opens up opportunities for housing, education, employment, and how we know that those are the protective factors. We know that those are the preventative factors that help people move on with their lives and not get caught up again in problems and in the system. And we actually heard really meaningfully in our last Lunch and Learn that focused on the YRA and the Incarceration Reduction Amendment Act about from someone who'd benefited from this and how profound that benefit was for him. So I think the YRA, although we sometimes forget that it also has this element in it, and the issue with the laws in Congress and the proposals that have been put into the budget proposals would be to shrink its application. It applied for about 50 years. Actually, I think even more like 60 years, 60 to 70, to folks, like I said, children, primarily teens, charged as adults in DC, as well as young adults up to the age 22. And then in 2018, the council made some changes to the law, including expanding its eligibility to age 24, recognizing our understanding now around brain development and why that should be the age range. So the proposal in Congress is to scale that back to 18. So it would only apply to to children, to teens tried as adults, which would actually take us back not only worse than where we were, and not it would be much further than where we were a few years ago. It would actually go way farther back down just to 18. So that's a pretty significant change in terms of who would then be eligible for record relief under the Youth Rehabilitation Act. And so that's why we make the case that the YRA, Second Chance Amendment Act, being able to get your record sealed actually is a very important public safety intervention and reduces recidivism, and therefore rolling these bills back, repealing the Second Chance Amendment Act, repealing the Youth Rehabilitation or rewriting the Youth Rehabilitation Act to limit its application would really undermine public safety in DC. Yet, ironically, it's being done in the name of public safety. And what would it mean to repeal the Second Chance Amendment Act? Let's hear from Nye about the history behind this law.
Yeah, so before the Second Chance Amendment Act was passed, DC had actually one of the most complex and restrictive record relief laws in the country. It limited relief to only a few misdemeanors and non-convictions. So there were no felonies included in that. It required long waiting periods for eligibility. And in general, it just imposed really burdensome record sealing procedures. The Second Chance Amendment Act, in contrast, really improves on this by one, including felonies in the list of offenses that can be sealed or expunged. And it's not all felonies, but not the most violent felonies. And that's a conversation to have about violent crime and um, who is included in these types of laws, from speaking to people that have records that have violent offenses on their record. I've definitely heard that they feel like anytime there is some kind of second chance opportunity, whether it's this law or other laws that are designed to help people with records, those with a violent offense on their record are always left out. And that again, going back to kind of breaking down the trust in the system and reintegrating people back in society, hearing from people that do have some kind of violent felony on their record from when they were 20, 21 years old, and now they're 41, and that is still, they're still not able to get that record sealed or expunged. It's still holding them back. Um, that is something that I think we really have to have a conversation about how we deal with people with violent offenses on their record and how they are always excluded from these types of opportunities. And obviously, it is a charged issue. I mean, I think when you think of violence, that really raises the specter of fear, of the potential for fear mongering from different politicians, from all of these things. And when we're looking at second chances, I think we want to look at including as many people as possible in that, right? And again, not only does that help the people and their families with records that are trying to move forward, but it helps to decrease um, incidents in the community. It helps to increase public safety at the same time. So I think that's probably an issue for another webinar, but something to consider. Um, and then when we're looking at the efforts in Congress to repeal the law, we have HR 5242 in particular that was framed to repeal the Second Chance Amendment Act and did pass the relevant House committee, but has not passed a full House vote yet. And as of now, what we are hearing from a lot of people that we work with is that Second Chance Amendment Act is safe at least through the year. It looks like Congress has a lot on their plates, as we all know, and we have elections coming up, and thankfully, it seems like the Second Chance Amendment Act in particular is not under threat of repeal in the near future. We keep fingers crossed because things can change at any time, and that has happened before. But we are very happy to know that as of right now, as I said, the latest intel is that there is not a repeal threat currently for the Second Chance Amendment Act, and I'll let Darby speak on the YRA.
Yeah, thanks, Nye. The YRA would be repealed, or rather rewritten, excuse me, by HR 9222 and Senate Bill 2686, which is the DC Crimes Act of 2025. As I mentioned, it would repeal it would repeal parts of the amendment that happened. It would actually go beyond the amendment that happened in 2018, but by reducing who qualifies for it, which is the most relevant thing here, so that it would only be folks under 18. And it would also make some other changes to the YRA. That bill has passed the full House. That passed last year, and there was a lot of misinformation shared about it. And so it's been really important, some of this kind of educational effort that we're making and that you all can make in talking about these bills. People were portraying, the opponents of it, or the proponents of repealing it or rewriting it, were were portraying it as allowing people up to age 24 to be in the juvenile system, which is completely inaccurate. And I think the or the reason why it was easy to make that argument was that in the bill, it's in the law itself, it defines youth as someone under the age of 25. And so they could then, um, say, look, if they're youth, that means they're going to get tried in the youth system, which is completely inaccurate. And if I think even a number of folks that voted for it, probably if they had better understood what it actually was, including the record relief, because of this strong, like bipartisan support for record relief in different ways, I have a pretty good feeling that it would not have had the same outcome. And so that'll be part of the education effort going forward and making sure that people understand that. It being passed in the House means that the next step is in the Senate. The Homeland Security and Government Affairs Committee is the relevant one, uh, but it could also be moved in through the Judiciary Committee as part of a larger package around either DC criminal law or even federal and DC criminal law. It also could bypass committee by being attached to some sort of must-pass legislation, like, we mentioned earlier, the budget, right? This is a very typical way that Congress interferes with DC by putting riders on our budget, saying we can't spend local tax dollars on X thing. Um, Two of the most longstanding ones are abortion and recreational marijuana. So that proposal is in the House budget proposal. It was in the House budget proposal that was approved last year, but that was not included in the final compromise that got the government reopened with the continuing resolution. So we're feeling hopeful that we can ensure that. But again, like Anai said, things can change on a dime. And especially with some of the fear mongering that's been happening and the misinformation about the Youth Rehabilitation Act, I think this one is of greater concern. That being said, we have also heard similar things that actually it looks like the Senate's not going to take up any of the DC bills through the end of the year. Again, could change any time, but we're hearing pretty positive things on that front, which is really refreshing. I wanted to also mention, following up on what Nye was talking about with the history of the Second Chance Amendment Act. I have a an interesting history with this law. I actually helped to write one of the earlier versions of it back in 2016. a decade ago. And we did that after learning how bad DC's record sealing procedures were. And we learned that because when we decriminalized marijuana in DC, I was working for Councilmember Grosso at the time, and we passed legislation to automatically seal everyone's marijuana, simple marijuana possession, convictions and charges, etc. And I'm sorry, not automatically to say that that would be something that could happen. Um, and then we discovered all of these complexities and the challenges, and that actually that was almost meaningless unless that was your only charge, basically, or unless you only had a couple very minor charges, you were not going to be able to get that relief. And that was because previously you could only have one chance ever at sealing your record. You had all these charges and convictions that even if they were not, regardless that they weren't eligible for sealing, they actually would make you ineligible. They were called disqualifying convictions or charges. And so that meant that it was like extremely difficult for anyone to get record relief. We wrote a bill, we introduced it, the mayor wrote a bill and introduced it. We had back and forth for a long time. Our bill was much better. Uh, but we knew that, maybe moving the mayor's bill with some of our components put in might get more support and get the mayor to implement it. That neither bill passed for a couple years. And then actually, when my boss at the time left the council, and so did I, um, now Councilmember Henderson picked up the fight, and the DC Justice Lab helped her write an even better version of that bill, which was called the Restore Act. And that version plus the Mayor's Second Chance Amendment Act, those two were combined in ways, right? There are some elements from the mayor's side, some elements from the Restore Act side. That's what became eventually passed and is now finally being implemented. And this really hit home for me a couple weeks ago when I got the opportunity to participate in a record relief clinic at UDC Law, and I actually helped someone prepare her materials, her motion to seal the one felony that she had, or that resulted from a altercation she had with her kid. That by all means was not really helping anyone for her to continue to have this record, and was actively impeding her ability to get employment. And we prepared that. And prior to the Second Chance Amendment Act, she would not have been able to get relief. And so that just really reinforced to me like so many lessons, right? One, like how important this law is, how it's helping people move on with their lives, and also how long change can take to happen sometimes, but how rewarding and important it is when it finally does happen. And I just having seen that firsthand and hearing her story, and there's more complications there, but in general, it would, to most people seeing the facts, they would say, yeah, it doesn't make any sense for you to continue to have this record. And then at the end of preparing her motion, she told me, oh, I can't wait to tell my daughter, who's now an adult, because she also has a felony from another incident between the two of them where she got the charge and where she got the conviction, so that she would now be able to get that off of her record. So it's really, really profound, the impact of this, of record relief and of the Second Chance Amendment Act in particular. So with that, let's talk a little bit about what's next. Actually, Nye and I both already spoke a little bit on this, but just to reiterate, we don't think there'll be a vote in the House on HR 5242, which is the one that would repeal the Second Chance Amendment Act. And there is not a companion bill in the Senate. That's not to say it couldn't be introduced at any time. It couldn't be added as an amendment, especially when we know this is a priority for a presidential advisor and for the U.S. Attorney for DC. But in this moment, it's looking promising. Similar with the YRA, not quite as promising, but feeling more confident that this Senate just has too much on their plate and is too dysfunctional, unfortunately. Well, unfortunate that it is functional. In this case, it benefits us. So they're probably not going to take it up, but we'll have to keep a real close eye on it because things can change on a dime. And these votes get scheduled with extremely little notice. And as you can imagine, getting people representing Nevada, New Hampshire, Florida to focus on something related to DC and why they should not vote for it is challenging. But we will be keeping a close eye on it. We will be sharing out information. We'll actually be sharing out a follow-up email with all of you and everyone that registered for this Lunch and Learn with all the materials we've shared here, with the slides, the copy of the recording. And you can also learn more about federal interference more writ large on our DC Justice Lab website. So, what can you do? How can you help with this situation? We know, like we've stated, it's not quite as dire as it was seeming at one moment, but we need to be ready to act. We need to do as much prevention as we can. So, sharing this information with your friends, with your colleagues, your family, especially in places with senators, we think the Senate is probably the best chance for stopping these kind of bills because of the filibuster. So that's a really excellent thing that you can do. I know the Senate will be going on recess this summer as people go back and campaign. So it could be if you've got friends, family, colleagues in states with senators, you can reach out, say, hey, maybe we can meet up with them and talk to them about why they need to leave DC alone and equip them with the talking points from this Lunch and Learn and the resources we're sharing. Watch out for calls to action on our social media and in our emails. That's where we'll send an update when or if something does happen. If this calculus changes, if suddenly something is moving forward in the Senate, we will absolutely be following up with everyone, all our supporters and followers, to let them know and let them know what action they can take that would be helpful. And in the meantime, tragically, there are so many attacks on DC, and that means there's a lot of opportunities to get involved, especially with what's coming up this summer around the increase on top of already the droves of federal agents and National Guard we have in our streets. We've been told that's going to increase even more and they're going to get even more aggressive. So that will be a really important way to get involved. But there's many other ways to get involved with many different groups around town. And that's one of the best ways to combat, not only combat this interference, but combat despair or feelings of hopelessness that might come from our challenging situation here in DC, where we have so little power in comparison to the federal uh, government, to Congress and the president and the president's administration. So that's what we would encourage. Um, Here's the resources. We've been sharing them in the chat. Thank you to Bethany Young, our policy director, for that. And we'll also share them again in the follow-up email. Want to go ahead and open it up right now to see if anyone has any questions about what we've talked about. And then from there, we'll move towards wrapping up.
Darby and I know you said this, but just to say it again, if someone has a record and just doesn't know where to start, where's the place where they can start? Where can they go?
Thank you for that, Bethany. I appreciate it. I should have mentioned that here. We actually have created a great website. So there's a number of places you can go, but this is a great place to start, would be our DC expungement site, which Bethany helpfully shared in the chat. That lays out the law, lays out the process, and links to some other resources. You also could reach out to any number of local legal service providers, including looking out for a record sealing clinic, reaching out to the Pro Bono Center at the DC Bar, looking for like legal aid, DC, other groups like that. And if you're an attorney, actually, even if you're not an attorney, yeah, DC law schools often are hosting clinics, and that's a great way to actually get involved as well and to help out. That's more on the local level and less fighting back on federal interference. But that act of helping folks prepare their motions was, like I said, so powerful. And there's a role to play there for folks who are attorneys and folks who are not, because there's, as you can imagine, there's a variety of tasks that are involved. And so just keep an eye out for those, volunteer with those if you see one and if you got time and have a chance to do so. Madeline, so glad you're here from Legal Aid. I don't know if you wanted to share anything um, further. Oh, fantastic. DC,
Yeah.
Legal Aid DC's. Oh, go ahead. Take it away.
Just saying hi, I'm a staff attorney at Legal Aid DC's Reentry Justice Project, and we do assist individuals seeking to seal or expunge or set aside their records. Please feel free to visit our website and either do an intake there or walk in at one of our walk-in intake locations. If we can't help you, we can always send an individual to any of the partners that we work with who also provide that kind of support.
Fabulous. Thanks so much, Madeline. And if you wouldn't mind to go ahead and throw your website in the chat, that would be fantastic. And we will also be sure to share that when we share the follow-up materials. Any other questions? Well, thanks so much, Sarah. I'm not one to keep you from getting some time back and enjoying this beautiful Friday. Thank you so much to everyone for coming out today. It's really meaningful to be able to share this information. Like we said, we know that providing people with information is an incredibly important preventative effort around stopping these attacks and equipping you to be able to talk about it with neighbors, with family, with senators, what have you. Our contact info is here. Always feel free to reach out.